Okay. Welcome everybody to this Work That Reconnects Network event. My name is Jo Delamore and I represent the Work That Reconnects Network, and I'm so happy to see so many wonderful people joining for this event today. Here we go. This event is part of our webinar and conversation cafe series, where we're offering a wide range of rich educational and supportive opportunities for our global community of Work That Reconnects facilitators, members, and friends of the network. Our intention is to strengthen the web of the Work That Reconnects community while continually reaching beyond our current edges to weave deeper connections with others who are contributing to the great turning in diverse and complementary ways. Today, we are super excited and feel really blessed and honored to be able to welcome Woman Stand Shining, Pat McCabe, for this conversation on paradigm as choice in the Great Turning. Pat is one of the people on this planet who I love and respect and appreciate so much, most, and feel like the words and the teachings that come through her speak directly to my heart. So I feel particularly honored to be able to be in this conversation with you today, Pat, and want to welcome you into this space and into this shared community, and invite you to just say hello and introduce yourself in whatever way you feel called.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jo. So I'd say greetings to each and every one of you. What an honor to be with you. Morning for me, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming to us from today on this Mother Earth. I'm right now at my mama's house in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She's 99 years old, and yeah. And both my grandmothers lived to be over 100. I say I'm in it for the long haul here. So this topic, this whole session and series is very relevant for me. And but I'll say that I'm from Dine Nation, and so I'll introduce myself in the way that we do and say she'eya tachi inishli aro ashi bashish chi ma irishgejne dashanale klaus chi dash check but that was done initially. And actually my mom has this artwork right behind here. And I was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life almost 30 years ago. And that has been a guiding way and principle for my life. And that's how I came to have the honor of being given the name Wayakpa Najimwi, Womaning Standing Shining. And yeah, just really, really grateful to have this opportunity to share what has been shared with me, and to have this conversation here today. It just feels timely, right? And I'm so grateful for this series, and I'm very, very grateful for Joanna Macy's work in the world. So yeah, I think that's it for me to introduce myself.
Great, thank you so much and welcome. Okay, so we're going to get into some very interesting terrain today. We're going to be talking about paradigm as choice in the Great Turning, and we were figuring that we might want to lay some groundwork before we go into some of these bigger questions around what does this even mean? What is paradigm? What is choice? How does that work for us in this time? How do we engage with this question? So Pat, I want to just start with the question of paradigm. We have, oh, whoops, what did I do? Sorry, I think I did something not quite right. Eileen, are we spotlighted? Can you fix that?
I'm seeing both of us spotlighted, okay. Which is
okay. All right, so I wanted to just talk about what paradigm is. I sometimes like to say the words worldview or mindset to help me get out of that abstraction. But I'm curious if you want to just talk a little bit so that we can all kind of come into some shared understanding around what are we talking about when we're talking about paradigm?
Well, I think, sometimes I've held talks that were just called "Who We Are, Where We Are, How It Is."
Yes.
So I guess that in a nutshell is maybe what I'm referring to when I say paradigm. What is our point of reference for being a human presence on this Mother Earth? What is our understanding about it? By what laws are we operating under? By what, maybe even what ethic? Yeah, so I think in a general way that's what I would say.
Great. Yeah, how it is. And when we're talking about paradigm as choice, I feel like we have something really big that comes up here around the general or dominant paradigm of modern world society that would not have us think that there is a choice. So the idea of like how it is in dominant paradigm is it's this way, and that's the way it is. So can we talk a little bit about what that means around choice? Or actually, let's first talk about like what is that dominant paradigm? I've heard you call it the power over paradigm. I've heard also that coming from Ray Eisler and Maria Kombucha's work is like this power over mindset worldview is underlying like kind of our general shared modern world, or kind of how do we want to define that? Because there are multiple paradigms, but there's one that we're like wanting to speak to here as far as that shared or dominant paradigm. Can you speak to that a bit?
And so let me just say that for a long time, I think as an Indigenous woman, I have felt like it has been a difficulty to carry two paradigms, at least two paradigms. I feel like there's this Indigenous paradigm that is from my lineage. There's modern world paradigm, and then there's emerging future paradigm, I'm gonna say. And so, so the way that I think about power over paradigm is pretty much just what it says. It's saying that the way that paradigm works is you must have power over another in some form or another in order to have what you need, in order to have food, clothing, and shelter. And so I often use this gesture to describe it. It's pyramid. The fruits of the labor travel from the bottom up to this little tippy point up here. So we're talking about the 99% and the 1% when we describe that. And the goal is to try to get as far up into this structure as you can in order to be able to have what you need a little more easily, right? And so what I say about that paradigm also is that it's inherently violent. I mean, if you have to overpower another, there is real or implied violence going on at all times there. And so I say that in that paradigm, actually, men are going to dominate because it's a brute force situation ultimately. And even though we have sort of a kind of genteel way of presenting ourselves sometimes within it, it's just barely below the surface how cutthroat the competition is, how we're beating each other out for positioning, for jobs, etc. And so, for myself, as I've been doing a lot of gender work, I've really come to say that I don't believe that men are the patriarchy. I believe it's the paradigm that is actually the force behind it. And part of the reason I say that is because in ceremony, I was told, you think you know what male or masculine is, and you think you know what feminine is, but you really don't. All you know is how those energetics behave in this power over paradigm. But if you were to plug them into a different paradigm, they would behave in a completely different way. And so I'm going to say that, generally for humanity, we think we know who humans are and what human nature is, but do we? I think all we really know is how we behave when we're put into this structure. So the other thing that I would say about the power over paradigm that is relevant to many conversations is that when so anytime we try to examine any part of the whole, and granted, it is a difficult proposition, because as Thich Nhat Hanh calls us, the situation is we're actually an interbeing. We're so deeply interrelated that it is hard to pull out any one thread and really, examine it apart. We don't get the clear picture when we separate things out from the whole, which is problematic in the way that this paradigm also goes about its science and research and et cetera. It's very compartmentalized. But what I want to say is that, for instance, in gender work and race work, the perfect example is when we try to say Black Lives Matter, what comes immediately is, well, all lives matter, or, like I'm hearing from many different directions in Indigenous culture, the word on the spiritual street is that women are going to lead. The women need to lead, and the men need to give them the space to understand what ceremonies need to be brought, and how they're to be done. And since they haven't been given that space a whole lot, not even in Indigenous culture, the power over paradigm entered deeply into our cultures. That it's going to take a little time for us to come up to speed, so to speak, and become proficient that way. So in that instance, as soon as we pull out one piece, everybody cries out, well, isn't that just separating more? Isn't that, it's a problem to try to examine any part of it. And I'm going to say that the reason I think that is because we're so conscious of power. And so we kind of, what I hear sometimes is that we really ding ourselves for being this power hungry species, but look at this structure we've been forced in. And so even those who, and I could say especially those who have been trying to operate out of another way of looking at things, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a minute, but this comes along and says, no, you must. I mean, this is what we call colonialism. This is what we call colonization. You will enter into this by force. So, I want to preface anything we're going to say today by just noticing that our sensitivity to power and any shifts in power, we come by it honestly. We come by it honestly because of this, because power is no joke in here. It's food, clothing, and shelter. And the world is more and more finding out about this as the hours pass. It's like record profits and record poverty. This is it, right? And so, I would have us consider, that yeah, we're very sensitive to any shifts in power. So this is a big handicap for us as we start talking about the kinds of shifts that need to be made. But I think if we can understand or consider, how this structure has honed us to always be concerned, so when we say women are going to lead, anybody who doesn't identify as woman is saying, well, wait a second, what does that do to me? Is that going to demote me in here? Is this, I'm already scrambling, and now we're just going to across the board say people of color get this seat, or women get to lead, or like, what does that do to me in here? And so this is a big part of why I chose this topic for us. And when we discuss what would be good for us to consider here, is because until we understand, how the nature of this power over paradigm has shaped us, shaped our heart, shaped our feelings, shaped our fears, shaped our hopes. It's hard to have any movement. We're a little bit gridlocked.
Yeah, excellent. So I feel like that's a really important piece here. How has it shaped us? How has it shaped our thinking, our positionality in the world? Um, and so can you share a little bit about the thriving life paradigm and or paradigms that feed into thriving life that you are aware of, that you know, that you experience, that you have inside connection to, that exist side by side, I would say, with the power over paradigm?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to give us well, let me start here and say that for as an Indigenous woman, I have felt like, like I said at the beginning, that carrying two or more paradigms has seemed burdensome in a way, right? It's the tearing between, one foot in two worlds is kind of the scenario we always paint. But what I'm coming to realize is I actually stand with enormous privilege to know, like to know somatically, to know in intuition, to know in experience that there are multiple ways of being a human being on this earth. There are multiple sets of principles that a human being could operate out of. Because I have to realize that there are many people who, for generations have only ever been presented with modern world paradigm, with the power over paradigm. So, in my imagination, and I guess I'll say in my experience and looking and assessing what's going on around us, I'm going to have to say that, for so many human beings on the earth, they look at the situation and say, well, Wall Street, that's just how the earth is.
Mhm.
Pharmaceutical companies, that's just how Mother Earth is, I guess, and so it's become, I become aware of what a powerful thing it is to say, yes, there is that. And then over here, there's a completely different understanding of who we are, where we are, how it is, right? And so one, my compassion is ever growing for this situation. And I will say that the numbers of people, I'll say, the depth of knowledge, for those who are trying to exist in a paradigm that is different from the power over paradigm, that is dwindling. And when I look at it that way, that's really alarming to me that is the case. So just lay that groundwork. But I think what I want to do is say, I feel like I need to make the case for some of my rationale that I'll go into a little bit later here. So I'll lay a little bit of that groundwork here and say, so if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years in relative health, harmony, and happiness. These are the premier scientists of sustainability that we say we want. So what I'm finding, and I feel like my work in the world is continuously trying to translate between thriving life paradigm and modern world paradigm. And it's a hard translation to make. It's a really hard translation to make. But I do my best at it, and it matters to me. So this science of sustainability is not, if modern world paradigm, so I get invited to speak all over the place on every possible subject, right? Because it's just the viewpoint of this other way of understanding of being human that people want to hear from, because it's foreign. It's a different kind of thing. But I want to point out that, it can become extractive to that, so we still think that we can compartmentalize and cherry pick different parts of Indigenous perspective and think that we know how to proceed. But it's not going to work for us to take pieces of Indigenous perspective and just plug them right into the power over paradigm. And actually, I was given warning for Indigenous knowledge holders and keepers that we have to be aware and careful about conceptualizing our way of being with Earth that modern world wants to call sustainability. Because as soon as we conceptualize it, as soon as we move it out of the somatic experience and the spiritual experience and the feeling experience, it's impotent, basically. So for that reason, I'm going to continue on here a little bit further and say, Dr. Greg Cajete, who's an amazing Native scholar, and he's been an advisor to my daughter. Some of you may know my daughter, Lila June. If you don't, she's a great one to look at. I say she's next level. And anyway, Dr. Cajete was an advisor for her in her studies. But anyway, Dr. Cajete wrote a book called Native Science, and in it he says that when he was looking at the early writings of the ologists, I call them, who were writing about their encounters with Indigenous peoples on this continent, he said they always use these words. They say, that these people are primitive and childlike. And so I love him because he doesn't go right to what a bunch of racists such and such as. He says there is a system of thought going on over there with these folks that causes them, every time they look at us, to have those words arise. I wonder what that system of thought is. So from his perspective, looking through his lens, and he has his lens, we all have our lenses, but he's looking over the fence, and through his lens, he's trying to see, maybe if I understand these people, where they come from, who they are, where they are, how it is for them, maybe I'll understand why that happens. So he believes that what he's seeing is that the people who are doing these early writings, they're English aristocratic men. And so he says, what is their culture about? What is it like? And what he believes he's seeing is that up until the age of 5, they're allowed to sing, dance, play, pretend, all they want. But at the age of 5, all that gets cut off. And the primary activity from that point all the way to death is the honing of the intellect, right? So these men come over to and witness us, and what are we doing? We're singing, we're dancing, we're having conversations with things they don't believe you can have a conversation with. We're seeing things that they don't believe they can see. We're being informed in ways that they are not familiar with. And so their only conclusion is that we're a primitive and childlike people, because even our grown men are engaged in the activities of children, of song and dance and etc. Right? So when I read this and heard this, I thought, wow, that explains like the whole situation to me. To me, that's what it was like. So here's paradigm meeting paradigm, right? And the dominating paradigm, gets to tell us what the overpowered paradigm is about. And that's how it's taught in this very meticulous indoctrination such system of schools and even of church, I'm going to say, and even all of the different societies and communities that are held in that place, right? So I feel like we've gone for quite a while believing that version of reality, and now suddenly we're kind of rethinking it, and that's how I get called up to speak in these places, right? We're like, wait a minute, something seems like there is something going on over there. What is it? So what I felt like, when I read that, and I started considering, well, who are we? And when I think about us, meaning Indigenous cultures, peoples, we're singing and dancing together multi-generationally. There is never a cutoff point for saying, okay, enough of that. Now we're going to move up to here. And in fact, my elders say that the intellect is the least reliable way of knowing anything. That's not to say that it has no use, but it is the least reliable way of knowing anything. That this organism of the human body is actually designed for a very broad spectrum of ways of perceiving, ways of knowing, ways of gaining knowledge. And when we engage the song, the dance, visioning, vision questing, so much information can come. And so the way I describe that is this information, before we came on live, I called on the larger community, I call it. So this larger community of all the rest of the life, because from my elders' perspective, they say, we were the last to arrive. We're the newbies here. And all of this life around us that has been evolving, they don't see us as being like the top of the evolution food chain. I mean, heaven help us. Let's hope we're not like the pinnacle of evolution. Look at us. Anyways, but all of this life around us is actually our elders, and they're trying to teach us how to harmonize, how to contribute to being interbeing. And so when I look outside and I see all this life, one, I say, what is it doing? It's all doing one thing. It's making more life, making more life, making more life. That's the whole goal. So I say, you know what? The plan that I think is going on here on Earth, it's life. Hey, guess what? The whole plan here, it's life. It's life. And we got so confused, like we don't, but it's life, okay? And the other thing that I'm seeing outside, and then I'll stop here and let us all come up for air here for a minute, but is that every single being out there is not only furthering itself to make the next seed, to make the next 7 generations for its kind, but it's not only designed and being successful at furthering its own kind, but the way it goes about it, the impeccable way in which it conducts its life, as author Barry Lopez said, is actually supporting the entire ecosystem around it, which just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we can really say that every single life form is contributing to the well-being of all life on the whole planet. I mean, that's some deep skill, okay? To be able to harmonize on such a broad scale in that way. And so I've come up with this word recently to describe this, and I say that all of my elders, plants, flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones, mountains, stones, water, they have the understanding of omnibeneficence. And so this is my prayer right now, is I believe, so there is this structure called, some people call it the medicine wheel. I wish I had one here. I don't have it right here. I don't normally do. I'm not in my usual place. I call it the sacred hoop of life. And so in that structure, the way I understand it is that every single life form was given a seat on that sacred hoop, and every single life form has a way of contributing to the whole. And if any member doesn't uphold their part, the integrity of the hoop begins to fail, not just for that little section, but for the whole hoop, right? So that's how interrelated we are. So when I talk about thriving life, what I'm really saying is, as I was watching, all these other beings contribute to the omnibeneficence of the entire hoop, I say, but we've also been given a seat on that hoop. And so I must have the capacity to contribute in that way. What is that? What is it that the human being offers to the whole situation here? I think it has everything to do with our feeling and our heart, honestly. But I think there is a way for us to be omnibeneficent. And if I hadn't already spoken this long, I would launch into one more piece. But we can go there at some point here in this conversation about the evidence of why that is true. And that actually relates a lot to my daughter's work. I saw somebody posting her TED talk. So that's a good one to check out, because she's talking about how we can be a keystone species. So anyways, I'll stop there. But thriving life paradigm to me is that way in which we not only cause ourselves to have thriving life, but we are a presence that creates the conditions for thriving life for all the rest of the life. And that means that we honor their sovereignty. We're going to have to honor their sovereignty to have everything they need to enact their part of omnibeneficence. So let me just hold up there for a sec.
That's a perfect place to go, because the next thing is sovereignty, choice. So we as humans, here we are. We've been conditioned into, we've been trained into power over paradigms, is what we have been told. And in this moment, we're inviting, in this conversation, we're exploring our ability to choose, to see something beyond that. And this omnibeneficence and this description that you've given, it's so much bigger than power over paradigm, right? Like power over paradigm narrows us down into these little, and like you said, kind of gets us into the intellect, narrowing. What you're describing is so much bigger. So how do we, or what is there about our sovereignty, our ability to choose in relation to the sovereignty of all other beings, to choose to see things differently, to choose to be in a different way, to to tap into another way of seeing and being?
Okay. Well, so as I was pointing to when I was, and I feel like that structure of the sacred hoop is a good structure to talk about this with. So we have the opportunity to contribute to the well-being of the whole as interbeing. And we can even look at all the life and earth as being a single organism. I find that helpful. So, maybe the human beings are like the liver and the body, and, all the birds are like, I don't know, the kidney or something. But all of it, I can't be well if you're not well, is basically this structure. So I call it, like the great three-legged race that we're in. But also it's such a spiritual endeavor to me to think about the fact that everything I do affects every other being. I mean, that's kind of overwhelming if you really take it in, if you really accept the reality of that. It kind of makes you not want to even take a step sometimes. I think, I mean, it could, and it should. I'm going to even go so far as to say. So, so on the one hand, I have free will to do anything I can think of to do, and everything I do affects every other being. So I say, what a setup. What a setup this is for us. So to me, what that says is it comes down to then asking, what is right use of will? What is the right use for my will? Because I get to choose anything I want to do. I mean, look at us. We're doing any dang thing we think up to do. It's possible for us to do that. But as I say, and so I sometimes I'll say provocatively, our big thing is to say, well, everybody gets to have their own truth. And so, when we're in a conversation and things start getting heated in some way about different points of view, when somebody says, well, my truth is, that's when you see that line getting drawn in the sand. It's like, okay, you can come over that line, but I'm telling you it's there. And once that happens, I'm not sure how deep our conflict will be, right? So my truth is a signal, right, of, and it is a way of acknowledging our sovereignty of having this point of view. But what I'm going to say about that is yeah, everybody gets to have their own truth, but there is a larger encompassing truth, it appears to be, which says that if everybody has their own truth, but it doesn't align with the laws of interbeing, if it doesn't align with the laws of this Mother Earth, then everybody might get to have their own truth, but we might not be able to have life on this planet. So I say it that way because in modern world paradigm, we're rewarded. I'm a little bit tangential here, but I'll get there. We're rewarded for our most original thinking. The person with the best idea gets the prize or the grant or, their picture in the newspaper or whatever it is, right? So we're encouraged to keep trying to have the most original idea, creative idea, and the prize is singular. It goes to an individual, generally speaking. It's a disappointment when you have to share first place with somebody else, right? You don't want that. You want, I'm first. And so, and we're honed that way. I mean, from the time we're in preschool, it's kind of present, starting to become present. It's so this idea that we can keep doing whatever we can come up with is super prevalent. And that's a direct product of this, right? And so I feel like the teaching of the sacred hoop is such a great visual to help us understand that there's no way of getting ahead if we're putting somebody else behind. There's just it doesn't actually add up at all. So let me get back to sovereignty. So sovereignty, the issue of sovereignty, I was actually in the UK. I was at Avebury Stone Circles, a remarkable place, and I had a visitation there, a very deep visitation, and in it I was told by spirit beings who came, and they said, you human beings, you love to participate in cause and effect. I thought that was a really interesting way to talk about us. I always like their language. You love to participate in cause and effect. And I'm like, yeah, boy, don't we ever, and they said, and okay, fine, but what you're leaving out, and your primary ways that you participate in cause and effect are through magic, medicine, and science, they said. So I noticed in the UK, in particular, and maybe it's in other places in Europe too, there's a lot of talk about magic, much more talk about magic than there is about medicine. But when I heard them say that, I heard medicine as being like what we talk about happens in ceremony, in indigenous ceremony, right? And so there is a thumbs up going on my screen. Is that happening? Where's that coming from? I'm not doing that. I'm not giving myself the thumbs up, just so we know. That was really funny.
You were getting the thumbs up.
It was like really wiggling around and stuff. Magic. Anyway, so I was thinking about it more medicine and more in terms of like indigenous ceremonial medicine, more than like say Western doctors of medicine, and then science, right? And so, but what they said was, but what you have been leaving out. So they're kind of talking about, us coming through our more dark ages or primitive times or something, moving up into where we think we're, advancing. But they're saying, but along this whole journey of you participating in cause and effect, you keep leaving out a critical law of this whole setup, which is the honoring of the sovereignty of all beings. Like no matter which modality you choose, you always think it's okay to leave out this idea of honoring the sovereignty of all beings. So when I was talking about the hoop of life, and I was saying every being not only has to have it in their own will, their own desire, let's say, to uphold their part of the hoop, but they also have to have what is necessary for them to uphold their part of the hoop. So swimming beings have to have water healthy enough in order for them to continue on in a thriving life way with their next 7 generations, right? For instance. So, when we go and collect medicines, let's say I'm going to go out and collect sage to burn for bringing clarity of mind, for clearing, for bringing me to a place of the best possibility for me to be an omnibeneficent being. I was always taught, we leave a piece of turquoise, my clan grandfather said, and we ask permission. And I always offer a prayer as I look out over the sagebrush, and I say, I'm praying for all of you. I'm praying for your next 7 generations. I'm praying that you'll always live in good health and abundance, and that you'll thrive. And I'm coming to you to ask for your help because I'm a pitiful human being, and I need help having right mind, right heart, right body, right spirit. And you know how to help me. So for that reason, I'm making this offering to you and your kind, your nation, and I'm asking anyone who would be willing to come with me for the purpose that I'm naming to make yourself known to me. And then I go and harvest. So what I say about sovereignty sometimes is, so everything that I do affects everything else. And here's another part of the setup. And everything has to eat something else. Mm-hmm. We actually cannot go through this life without taking life. Even if you're vegan, you're still going to take a life. That carrot had a life. It had a destiny, and you're interrupting it to eat it. And so what does that mean, really? It means that we are bound in relationships of sacred reciprocity, of sacred offering. That's the only way for us to live our life. I mean, we can do it without honor, and we can do it unsacredly, for sure. But to have right relations, this is why this gesture matters. It's a way of having a mutuality. And we could even say it's a way of coming into a consent. Mm-hmm. So that's the other word that you named, consent. So I have a belief around consent, and that came from an experience of doing a lot of ceremonies in Europe to address what took place during the witch hunts. And what I came out of that with was because this is a free will construct, we don't have the right to interfere with any other being's enactment of their free will without some form of consent, without some form of negotiation. And when we trespass over that line, that's a violation of spiritual law. And there will be an accounting that has to come due. And the way the spirits described it to me is they said, it's kind of like what you're talking about when you talk about karma. They say karma, the way you're understanding karma isn't quite right. And I don't know what they meant by that, but that's what they said. But they said, it's kind of like how you talk about karma. So you need to always be having consent. So what that says to me, and especially in this time, especially the more authoritarian things are becoming, the more imposing things are becoming, is what I feel like is we've been talked out of the power of our consent from birth. Like the first message in a Western medical hospital birth is, one, it's treated as an emergency. And then, you're taken away from your mother's chest and bare skin and breast, which, even though scientifically it's been proven, like that's the thing that sets the course for every human being, right? And you have to be weighed and measured and, all this stuff. So right away, you're taught your needs do not matter here. There are things much more imperative than you and your comfort and your needs. Forget it, so all the way from the beginning, even when you're assigned a social security number at birth, does your mom really recognize that she's signing you over as collateral to the IRS in the United States by consenting to this, right? Do we understand that by going off to kindergarten and first grade and whatever, that we're giving our consent to a very, very deep indoctrination into a paradigm that is actually moving us towards death. Did we give our consent there? No, because consent was never explained to us. So by the time we get out of school, we're pretty unclear on why consent matters. But I'm going to say it's crucial. So one thing that I say to people these days is I feel like it matters to understand when you're giving your consent and when you're not giving your consent. And when we don't speak up, we give our consent by default. And I feel like I'm noticing in all different kinds of ways, our consent, it's not a matter of somebody just coming right up to you and saying, do you agree to this or do you not agree to it? There's other ways of giving consent, even at music festivals. You know, I was with some young people and they were like, come on, Auntie, let's go dancing. And I was like, cool, yeah, let's go dancing. I was at Boom Fest in Portugal, right? And I was speaking there. And so anyway, I said, well, let's go have dinner first. So I walked past the main stage and we ate. And then by the time I came back, a different kind of music was on. And I was like, man, that music has teeth and claws. That music doesn't sound right to me, you know? And so even if I were to enter into that space and say, okay, right on, man, let me go to it, you know, that's a consent. And so I feel like even at a music festival in that instance, I really felt like I was watching a lot of human energy and a lot of human consent being gathered. And because of the nature of the music, I didn't know for what purpose. Mm-hmm. So for instance, having an awareness about when and where and how we're giving consent matters. And if we say, look, you're going to overpower me, IRS, government, whoever it is, but I just declare it. I do not consent, because I say that sets so much in motion on a spiritual level. It sets spiritual law in motion. So this is something that I've been talking about to some degree. I was a little bit rambly there, trying to get that out, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a really important thing for us to look at, because in your story, in hearing what you're saying there, I know that there's a lot of ways that we can interpret this strictly through a power over paradigm lens when we're talking about consent. And then there's that deeper question of, what does consent and sovereignty look like? What is it? How does it express in a wider, deeper way in the thriving life paradigm? So, and I feel like that's the place where we get tangled up so much, because we're so deeply indoctrinated. And I say we by really like pretty much anybody who was educated in a modern way, interacts with modern technology, speaks a modern language. I mean, like it's a pretty big we of this power over paradigm conditioning that we've received. We're so deeply conditioned that it's hard to see our way out of it, right? Because it's like such a tangle, and we're using the tool that in some ways we're using the tool that was conditioned to try to get ourselves out of that entanglement. But one thing I noticed what you were saying was that if we go back in the story to harvesting sage, and we kind of get into that place of that interspecies sovereignty, that interspecies beneficence, that interspecies interrelation. And we really recognize the consciousness, the aliveness, the sacredness, the presence, the actual conscious presence of all beings. Then consent is really looking different. You know, like we can feel it and work with it on a much deeper level. I noticed that it's so easy to try to separate, or we're so quick to try to separate out, like, well, who has consent and who doesn't? Like, do stones have consciousness? Does weather have consciousness? Are carrots less conscious than sheep? You know, like there's a lot of questions in there. But when we're talking about omnibeneficence and this mutual thriving that you're describing, it's at a different level. We're dealing with it in a different way than if we're like, oh, well, let's figure out the hierarchy of consciousness and decide who has more consent than who else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, consent gets really freaking inconvenient. It's very inconvenient.
Right.
And
Oh,
so
and
we were always, this is intellect. Intellect is, hierarchical, categorizing, and again, it has its place, but not on everything. And so yeah, consent is very inconvenient to modern world paradigm. And so
yeah,
we're, part of the intellect also is this thing about looking for loopholes continuously and finding them too. And yet it doesn't change the actual reality of, is life thriving or not? I mean, we're coming to that place now where that's the bottom line.
right.
I say that's one, actually, I mean, it's a little bit scary in some ways to think about, but for me, I actually find some relief in the fact, like, well, now we're going to get down to finding out what works and what doesn't work doesn't work. It's because we're, the intellect can spin and spin and spin until, like say, the logic train gets farther and farther from the truth of the reality of the situation. But because we can line it up, because this then that, and because that then this, and because this and that, pretty soon we're like way over here, and the reality of the situation is the water is toxic, you know, and things can't live by it. So yeah, that's intellect for us.
Yeah. That inconvenience, I think, is a really important tool. It's a really important thing to allow ourselves to be inconvenienced. And this this asking permission and actually waiting for a response, and actually being willing to hear the response, and being, like you said, with the harvesting sage, like, who among you wants to come with me to help? Who among you is willing to help with my lungs, with my household, with my clarity of mind? And then waiting to see. Maybe nobody does. Maybe none of the sage wants to come that day, and you'll have to know, how to hear that answer. But that is like a big no-no in the power over paradigm. It's like, to be inconvenienced by something that we perceive to be lesser, or something that we want.
Yeah. Well, and let's look at that a little bit deeper too, in that, so it's inconvenient only from a certain perspective, right? From one paradigm. So from an indigenous perspective, here I am speaking pan-indigenously. Every now and then I get dinged for doing that, but there is a lot of commonality between different peoples and cultures around the principles of how to be with Earth, and how do we go about this interbeing thing in an honorable and respectful way. And so, I always think about listening to Martin Prechtel's story, another amazing teacher. And in it, he talks about how the people he was with in Guatemala, their understanding was that they had to replace every single thing that they used in this life in their lifetime. So he talked about how, different visitors would come and look and say, wow, these people are like primitive and in abject poverty. How sad. And he's like, no, not at all. They just know that for every tree they cut down for their house, they have to be able to replace it before they die. So that's a different principle for living. And as he puts it, he goes, I'll never be able to repay the debt of me having this iPad sitting here. I can't repay it. I can't repay it. And that's not the only gadget I have in here, so yeah, and he talks about, and I don't know, I don't know how I feel about this, but he says, so the earth is beginning to extract her due from our psyches. So that's an idea to ponder as well, right? My view is that I just never see her as, I mean, I don't know, unless that's a law of physics, but it's never a vengeance kind of situation with her, is my feeling and my experience. But so what I say is, it's an inconvenience if if one, the goal is to amass as much as you possibly can so that you never have to be in relationship with others. You can have your own ecosystem for your own single family, like an entire ecosystem for a single family. I mean, think about that. How in the world can the earth support that? She can't. She's not. It's if the goal is to always, if you really believe that the fastest way to do things is to go from point A to point B in a straight line, and that it's going to be okay to leave out feelings, to leave out spiritual belief, to leave out the rest of the community, human or otherwise, and not think that eventually it's going to slow you down because you're going to have to go back and deal with all these messes that going from point A to point B in a straight line at top speed is leaving.
Mhm.
I talk about, the efficiency of ravens. Ravens are efficient. They're smart. They're so smart. They learn, they talk, they play. They can hang out in the winter and just have a ball, with just what they have on their bodies. I mean, they're remarkable beings. And their way of efficiency is not moving from point A to point B in a straight line. And if we look around, there's very little on this earth that moves and conducts themselves in that way. So inconvenient in what way? So when I think about our my people's culture from pre I don't know how far back we want to go, but certainly before the superimposition of this nation state onto this part of the earth. And I think about what life must have been like living under that principle. I got into trouble saying this in front of Winona LaDuke, so I don't want to make it sound like, it was all just, native flute playing. And, we got down to business on many things. We developed, thousands of varieties of corn. That was a deep science. But I think that, how could we express this this desire to participate in cause and effect? How did we go about that, knowing that we were going to have to do it? There again, that language is coming from this other paradigm, that we had an opportunity to do that in concert, in harmony. So that's a big word in Dine language, hojo, harmony, balance, beauty. It's translated in English oftentimes to beauty. What makes something beautiful? We think about it deeply. And so how we expressed our creativity, how we expressed our desire to participate in cause and effect was different. Was it deprived? Not from where I'm sitting. It feels like it was, it sounds pretty amazing to me at this point on the planet. So to think about, moving from ceremony to ceremony, now it's time for initiating the young woman. We're going to take the entire cornfield and put it behind her, because she is the furthering of the next 7 generations. She's just entered into that time of her life when she can make more life for us, which means that the Dene way will continue, which means that this part of the earth that Dene people inhabit, in which they have a symbiotic relationship, they cause the earth to thrive, the earth causes them to thrive, which causes them to help the earth thrive. That's a continuously building cycle. That means that's going to get to continue. The conversation between the earth and the 4 sacred mountains where we are and cosmos is going to continue. And that's cause for rejoicing. Is that a sacrifice? Really? I hardly think so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and in the matter of seeing it in that thriving life paradigm, that's where it's rooted, is because it's like being willing to wait for the answer, being willing to slow down, being willing to be with and present to the fullness and the really long picture, is instead of from the power over paradigm, being temporarily inconvenienced on your route to from point A to point B in a straight line for short-term gains, with it just depends on really what we're valuing, right? And
Right, while
what
destroying
how we're
every
defining,
relationship along the way, right?
right?
Like every
So
relationship.
so I'm curious, do you have some thoughts around like what are some of these embedded structures? Some of them are hidden, some of them are internal, some of them are systematic and external in our society. What are some of these embedded things that keep us locked into power over paradigm? Or maybe when we're trying to relate in a thriving life way, what scoops us back into power over paradigm? How does the power over paradigm hook and capture?
Well, I've got a few little notes here of things that might be good, and I think they fit into this category. Um, so one, I've been saying that I feel like we have low self-esteem as a species right now, right?
Mhm.
I hear it all the time, the earth would be better off without us. Everything we touch, we destroy. We're destroyers. That is just our nature. So there again, this is human behavior when it's plugged into this situation. Maybe if we were plugged into a different situation, that would not be our nature at all, and I believe that's true. So one, I'll just say as a blanket statement, I believe the earth could live without us. um, And I'm also going to say that I don't think she is able to be her fullest expression without us.
Mhm. Mhm.
There is something that we bring here, that we could bring here, and that maybe we have brought here at other times, that enhances life here, that causes life to thrive at a level that it could not without us. So maybe we can just take that in for just a second here. The
Mhm.
earth cannot arrive at her pinnacle expression without us. She could do something without us, but I don't think it could be that highest fulfillment of her consciousness, of her destiny. I mean, I feel like Earth has destiny. She has her to-do list, okay? And it's more than to do with us. It's like her participation in the solar system matters. This whole solar system that's moving in the galaxy, that's moving through all different kinds of energies and densities and consciousness in cosmos. I mean, she's a playa, right? So and we could be a player too, and help with that whole process if we would. And that's the big if we're talking about, right? But so one, I want to say that, and so part of, I'll go into a little bit about my daughter's work. As she was describing it to me, she was talking about how they're taking these core samples out of the earth. They look at, so the deeper down into the earth you go, the farther back in time you go. It's like sedimentary level layers of life and civilizations, or however we want to say that, right? Presences. And so they're looking at fossilized pollen. That's part of how they determine what was present at different times. And so, there you go back far enough and there might be only a few different kinds of pollen present, but then you see human presence arrive, and suddenly the diversity grows. And
Mhm.
so, what she's pointing out in her work is that we had land management practices that Western science has not been either aware of or acknowledged or understood very deeply. But so much of, like the hardwood forests all throughout the Southeast, those were all cultivated. She proposes that even the rainforests in South America, the jungles, were also cultivated, co-creation and cooperation wise. Um, and so, to me, when she said that, I just wept, because I just felt like, wow, that that is our scientific evidence that we can be a presence that causes life to thrive, that enhances the whole situation. And then it made me think about this. So, in the United States, and maybe in other places, there are comparable situations, but in the United States, in schools, the way, the ships arriving on this continent is described is really a psyop kind of situation, because what it always says is, here comes I don't know, I forget what the three ships are they always name, but anyway, it doesn't matter where they landed on the continent. They always say the same thing, right? They say, wow, this place is incredible. It is flowering and fruiting and flourishing. Game is plentiful. I mean, it's Eden, they said. And what's always implied in that story is that, they'd come upon the new world, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning, and also calling it Eden. It has been undespoiled by human hands. Because if human hands had been on this continent, it would look like where we came from, right? And that is a story that has been planted deeply in the human psyche. Well, newsflash is that there were millions of human beings living on this continent when those ships arrived. There were civilizations had risen and fallen. Now, was there never any wars, never any arguments? No, we still had human nature to contend with, but whatever was going on here, life was thriving and flourishing. And so that is something I point to say, look, that's our capacity. And not only that, but we had different peoples with different, with languages that were unintelligible to each other, with cosmologies that were very different from each other, living side by side. So we also had social technologies that kept things peaceful enough for us to cause life to thrive. So, I think that this idea that we are destroyers is a huge thing to begin to eradicate out of our consciousness. Mm-hmm. We have a place here. We were given the honor of having a seat on this sacred hoop of life. The grandmothers say there are things throughout the earth and the cosmos and the multiverse upon which are completely dependent upon what the human heart has to offer. Mm. So I was just listening to Lila June at Pioneers, and she was having the audience say, I am good. I am sacred. I belong. She was talking to European descent people primarily. And she was saying, so repeat after me, I am good. I am sacred. I belong. So this is, to me, like kind of step one in many ways for stepping out of power over paradigm, because power over paradigm is constantly creating a sense of lack, not only economically, but also in our soul, in our psyches, in our identity. It's always pointing out what could be more. So another place that I look to about what keeps us stuck is, I'm going to say, law. Because law right now is deeply tied to profit. Mm-hmm. And profit is only being considered in terms of money. Even though there's all different kinds of profits we could be having. We could have any kind of profit, right? So many different kinds. And so one thing that I have been proposing in different places, and I'll say it here now, is if we believe that every single legal contract that exists right now has to be fulfilled, we are going to lose this life. I'm going to say that again. If we believe that every single legal contract that exists right now has to be fulfilled, we are going to lose this life. Guaranteed. There is not enough earth to cover everything that is promised in legal agreements at this moment. Now, that's a radical statement, but it's also, I think, a total reality. So what does that mean then? that means that, because, our legal rights are sacrosanct. But what I think it means is that we're going to have to start moving into considering how do we, I've just been 4 or 5 years now in this deep study of reimagining money and protecting the sacred. And so this is way up on my mind right now. We're going to have to consider, how can we reimagine agreements? And how can we reimagine profit? What kind of profit really matters now? And as long as I'm going that far, one thing that that I've been saying is, all this wealth holding. I mean, I don't know how many billionaires there are on the planet right now, right? But a billion's quite a bit, and way more than a million. You see those descriptions of was like millions like 30 seconds, and a billion is like 33 years or something like that. It's like, it's big. It's a big difference, right? So you got all these billionaires on the planet, but what I want to propose is that hoarding of that money, like the life, and this is also pointing to how powerful our beliefs and our imagination is too, right? But life is being sequestered in money. I think it's helpful for us to look at it that way. The life is being sequestered in money, even though money is our construct. And I've even heard one elder call it a spell that was cast, right? And so for you to be withholding $1 billion, all of that life that is sequestered in $1 billion out from life, is part of what's killing this planet. So I am saying it is now time to let life flow back into life. Mm-hmm. That flow needs to come back into life. And actually, I have a prayer about that, which I could read if we want.
Yeah.
I think it might be worth it. Let me see if I can pull that up real easy.
I think it's a good time to start transitioning into sharing about your project. So I don't know if that prayer is a good segue.
Yeah, I think it is. Great. Let's see. Sorry. I didn't think I was going to do that, but I do think it makes sense.
That's all right.
All right, let me come back here. I'm looking for the wrong thing. That's not it.
Maybe I'll give you a second to do that while we all practice for a minute saying, I am good. I am sacred. I belong. Maybe you can say that a couple of times in your space to yourself, out loud to whoever is listening.
So, yes. I belong. As a human being, as a five-fingered one, I belong. I belong to this earth. There is a place for me here that only I can fill as human being. Yeah. So, this endeavor that we were beginning, and I was asked to put some words together to send out to this community that was participating, and it was a part of our wanting to reimagine money and protect the sacred. And so there was money being put into the center, and with a certain, after spending 9 months in community studying, what are the unconscious agreements that we hold around money, and let's bring them to consciousness. And it was very tender, and the intimacy was very tender, because as I said in that group, talking about money is as intimate as talking about sex. there are many rules about it, and there are many ways of making it comfortable to try to preserve the power over that has occurred in that kind of economy, right? And so anyways, this basket that was collecting this money, we wanted to have it to begin to examine our unconscious beliefs and to be able to talk about our processes, what comes up for us. So it was an experiment. One of our elders, Orland Bishop, that was involved with this, he said, yeah, there's money in there, but it's not about the money. The money is actually kind of a placeholder for what we're really trying to work with here. So anyways, that was part of this, but this basket was called the third drawer. So you'll hear me say that in here. So here's what we had to say. Here's what the Spirit came to say. Together we make a place where thriving life, where future, where what is holy can meet, align, harmonize, and have access to our construct that we call money, where all that has been extracted from the Mother Earth, from the bodies of men, women, and children, from the body of the oceans, from the sky, from the bodies of the flying ones, the swimming ones, the creepy crawly ones, the four-legged ones, from the plants, from the standing nation, the trees, from the stones, from the soil, from the waters, from the internal organs of the Mother Earth, coal, gold, oil, from the five-fingered one's goodness, from our love, from our psyches and from our souls, from each place from which it has been extracted and gathered, from all the places where the flow of what is needed for cycling, spiraling life has been confined, directed, channeled into ways that do not serve thriving life or love or light, that do not serve future. All of this decimation of the beauty, harmony, balance, substance, and the sacred movement of life is now here, recognized, reconciled, revered, and placed in the healing hands and volition of a deep and holy co-creation, is now released, flowing out and flowing out and flowing out, a dam of life released to the places most critical, to the places most generative, to the places most restorative, to the places most joyful, to the places most creative for the wholeness and integrity of interbeing, to the places most sacred, to the places most affirmative of our true desire and our deepest consent to live unto 7 generations, to live with all our relations on this sacred, thriving, powerful earth, to align with her boundless creativity, ingenuity, and unconditional love in the creation of endless, ever-evolving life. We give our love here. We give our place in fearless generosity here. We give our faith here. We give our place in radical abundance here. We give our consent here. With this opening, we break the bondage that was law over love. We open and prepare ourselves to love the future in ways that the scarcity paradigm would not allow. We give this third drawer power and ask it to give us future. With our participation in this gathering, with the sacred gift of our volition, from the place on the sacred hoop of life that we have been given to uphold, we open this field of the third drawer to receive the future of the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. May all that this flow encounters be touched and transformed in whatever way is right by this currency of consciousness that has reached out to us, and flow into and through the future consciousness that we are growing into. Holy life, holy future, please guide and direct us. Show us the ways.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, the project.
Yes, tell us a bit. You've been on a big journey that is really moving into choice through paradigms and restructuring relationships with money, land, people. So tell us a little bit about where you're at and what you feel like you want to share with this community at this point.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to begin to put words and speak out loud about this. So one, I want to say that, part of the principle that I was shown and given in such a powerful and deep way, I just ask for blessings always on the Lakota people, Lakota Nation. But it's a visioning culture. And so I came to learn how to do my very best to live my life by vision, and not vision like good ideas. I don't mean that. And I don't mean genius and brilliance from humans. It's a collaborative co-creation of when we sit still and invite the whole community to have their input, and I offer myself up and say, what would be the best use of my life? What would be and therefore what would be the best use of my will? Going back to that idea of asking what is right use of will. And so I have found that, from modern world perspective, it might sound constricting to, to say, I'm going to commit to, as we say, crying for a vision, and then whatever comes, I'm going to follow it. But I have found that my life is extraordinary. I mean, Spirit is continuously making outrageous proposals. And if I choose to find the courage to say, okay, I have no idea how you think that's going to happen, Spirit, but okay, I will propose it along with you and see what happens. Like, just incredible things have come up in my life. And so as I've said in other places, I've had it with genius and brilliant ideas. I want to be led, because I don't think we know. I don't think we can know, being as embedded as we are in this. We're a fish trying to see out of water, and it's very, very difficult. And I mean, if we just look at this Mother Earth, and I say that her economy is radical abundance and fearless generosity. And yet we are so bound. You say, what is a hindering thing? Money, or a concept of money that was created in here, and we've superimposed it on radical abundance and fearless generosity, and we're mesmerized. We cannot shake. We have such a hard time shaking that belief in the money, even when this earth is like showering us with apples and everything. We're still like, no, it's all very scarce and it's very difficult and hard to come by. We're hypnotized. That spell, that cast is deep. So every way that we can to free our beliefs of we are bound by money, and only if it makes sense in the way we interpret money can we do it. I say we can't not do what needs doing over money. Can't. So that's can be a pretty big leap of faith, but to align with this radically abundant, fearlessly generous earth has been working out okay for me. So I can bear witness a little bit that way. But anyways, so what's going on is, there's a lot of movement around something called land back, right? And not everybody knows what that means. And it actually is got a lot of different meanings, I think. But a simple way to describe it is to say that, perhaps these people who have some knowledge and lineage and experience with being a human presence that has a shot at causing all life to thrive, perhaps we should let them tend and steward lands that was taken from them. We should give it back to them and let them, have a shot at it. What do we? And so for some people, that's a gesture of reparation and healing, for knowing the people who come from European descent and who know that their ancestors came by their wealth in this nation through oil, through extraction, through land theft, through timber. They want to find a way to create restoration there. And I know in the beginning, I was like, I didn't give that the weight that was called for. And the reason I didn't is because I'm kind of to the point where I'm like, I don't know. I just want to, whoever can acknowledge the sovereignty of all beings on land to just do it, let's do it. Whatever people you come from, or, but now I understand that that is really important. Forgiveness is the release of a spiritual medicine that is hard to really fathom how deep and wide it travels. So any movements toward forgiveness, I was told, is the release of massive medicine on the earth. To forgo revenge. Revenge is bouncing a rubber ball against the wall. It's going to come right back every single time. To forgo revenge is a pretty good step, but when we can actually arrive at forgiveness, then we're actually doing something that's releasing a lot of spiritual help for the whole situation. So, the land back possibility is a place where reparation and forgiveness can happen. So I find myself today, there were young people, Dine youth, who turned to our tribal government. So you got to understand, our tribal governments were created as being negotiators with the United States government. So they were what do you call them? They were stocked with people that the United States government knew would agree with what they wanted to do. So and some of those tribal governments still serve in that way. Some of them have kind of taken their own volition and are really working for the people and the interests of the people, but not all the tribal governments are. So in our case, the youth said to our tribal government, look, we no longer consider you our leaders or our elders, which is a pretty radical statement, because you are selling our lands out to extraction. Mm-hmm. And you are making our lands so toxic that we will no longer be able to live here. And once we can no longer live here, we will no longer be able to be Dine. Mm-hmm. And this is something that is a little bit hard, it seems like, for modern world paradigmers. And I'm kind of schizophrenic. I call myself that, and I'm also Indigenous paradigmer. But to understand is that Indigenous people can't just pick up and be Indigenous anywhere. That's what Indigenous means. It means to be of place, right? And so I say, culture is not a human construct. Culture is the Mother Earth expressing herself as human being in any given place. That's how deep it is. So this is what the youth are pointing to. They're saying, hey, you're going to make this land so toxic that we won't be able to live here. And that means the Dine people will cease to exist. And that means our part of the lineage of being omnibeneficent is in jeopardy. And that is not something we can tolerate. So they said, instead of going to you, we're going to go and walk to each of our 4 sacred mountains, our original elders, our original teachers who gave us the understanding of how to be human being. So they embarked on these really long walks, 300 miles and such. And so the first mountain they went to was to the east. And I guess I should kind of condense this story a little bit, but they encountered a couple there who owned land at the base of the mountain. And the woman saw them trying to do ceremony on a street corner because we had no place to really do our ceremonies there. All the land is privately owned at the base of that mountain, or owned by the state. And so they invited these young people to come and camp out on the property and make their prayers and ceremonies. So that led to a relationship where my daughter Lila had asked if she could have a ceremony house built there. And they said that would be the greatest honor of our lives if you would build a ceremony house on the land. We've always wanted to be able to give Dine people access. So this is how the relationship started. Eventually, the couple decided that they had to sell their land. And they said, wouldn't it be great if Dine people could be the holders of this land? And I said, yeah, that would be great. But I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to just give it away. And they said, no. So this was the outrageous proposal. I wasn't looking to be a land backer. It wasn't, I just minded my own business. And anyways, but I could hear that, and I was sitting at this table of this third drawer for one thing. So I was sitting in a very unique seat. And I just thought, I think I prayed and asked, do you have a part in this? And I heard yes. And so I said, okay, Spirit, this is a lot of money, it sounds like to me, but let's try to go for it. So we did, and everything came through to be able to purchase this land. And there is some debt associated with it actually at this moment, but nevertheless, and so after that ceremony house was built, our people have been trickling through to pray there. The owner said, a dozen or 15 people have come through every month since that ceremony house was built 5 years ago. Our medicine people have been traveling there. So we now have a place, for us to do ceremony there. But what I really want to talk about it all is to say that the mountain has been speaking, or actually it feels like a third party speaking on behalf of the mountain, because sometimes it refers to the mountain. And what's being said is, let's notice what mountains do. So they're gathering energy from the earth and they're focusing it, which, now that I say that, you're like, oh, well, that's obvious. But until that was said to me, I was like, I don't know that I really thought about it that way. But it's like, yeah, they gather earth energy, they focus it. And they focus it to be able to speak with this holy star, our sun. And that sun broadcasts that earth consciousness out to cosmos. And then cosmos comes back and responds back through this holy star, back down to the mountain. The mountain is, so there's this huge conversation going on between earth and cosmos, and mountains have a huge role to play in that. And then I was told that that right now, many of the mountains are a little bit dormant in that function. And part of that has to do with the fact that we, the five-fingered ones, have not been participating. That there's, here again, here's our function, our calling out with our heart. We could say with our prayer, with our ceremony. What is ceremony? It's an agreement between, community to come together in a focused way and to acknowledge who we are, where we are, how it is, the blessing of being given a seat on this Mother Earth, right? And participating in co-creation of reality. So I was told that this mountain is dormant, not all the way dormant, but dormant-ish, and that human beings have always cooperated and collaborated with mountains. We've always played a role in this conversation, but we've stopped doing that. And so they said, so yes, Dine people who lived in place and have been considering these mountains for millennia, they have their deep ceremonies, and yes, by all means, those should continue. But at the same time, even peoples who don't have that kind of ceremony, they can participate also. When they come with consciousness and regard the mountain and feel the awe that we feel when we approach mountain, feel the exhilaration of, beginning to climb upon her. It's powerful. And so even those feelings are contributors to this conversation. And so they told me, daughter, you need to go out and remind the people that we have this capacity. It's hard for us to believe it when we've been in this. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to say it in a way that opens the heart, I hope, to say, the mountains need us. And this mountain specifically is calling for it now. So I am launching a campaign to say that I would like 1 billion people to say that they acknowledge that as a human being, we have a capacity to cooperate and collaborate with mountains in facilitating this conversation between Earth and cosmos. Because the cosmos is trying to send us all kinds of help, and they need our participation in order for this conversation, this exchange, this help, this energy moving in. And so there's that part of the campaign of just acknowledging that that's a human capacity. There's a secondary part of the campaign in which, you know, in the spirit of that third drawer prayer, I'd love to see, you know, there were contributors who gave large sums of money to purchase this land, and that's one way of going about it. But you know, as we always say, if we put ourselves together and we all contribute $1, you know, so if we have a millionaire giving $1 million, let's have 1 million people giving $1, and leverage our capacity that way. So I'm also going to be inviting for anybody who feels to make a contribution to help complete this everything that needs to be completed on this land, to make it a place. So the other thing that'll be happening on this land is it's going to be the site for this school that I was told a decade ago or so that I would be starting, called Joy House, the School for Unlearning. And Joy House, the School for Unlearning, is sort of what we've been doing here today, and expanding on many of these topics. But it also includes a land-based component of remembering that food is our medicine, and different things that way. So I'll stop there, but that's what's going on currently for me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for telling that story to this group. And there's so much to this story that makes me so happy to know that this vision has come through you and this journey has been happening. And I want to acknowledge that we've got people in the chat already expressing like the mountains that called to them in their lives, and what it was for them to have a call from the mountains. And I've also experienced that so deeply with the very mountains that you're speaking of. I was called directly to that place, and watched over by this particular sacred mountain that you're talking about, for many, many years. And so it's there, it's being already received. This piece that you've put out in this community, it's already so deeply received. And we'll gather some information to put in the follow-up email, at least preliminarily. And if you just stay tuned, if there might be something more specific that we share when it's ready. So stay tuned for an email from us that could lead you to how you can connect with Women Stand Shining and this campaign, and the Joy House School of Unlearning, and this beautiful project that is just beginning to really emerge. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing all of that. I'd love to open it up for a couple questions if you're up for that.
Sure, of course.
Okay, so if you have something that you'd like to share, you can click on the little dots in the bottom of your screen, or actually you can click on the reactions in the bottom of your screen and raise your hand in that way.
Joe,
Yes.
Pat, there had been during the course of the chat somebody who was interested in hearing a little bit more about Pat's take on veganism, that there's no central nervous system in a plant, and plant sentience. And then somebody else was just kind of captured by the notion of omnibeneficence. I just wanted to share those two questions that were in the chat earlier. And other than that, I think we can open it right up.
Okay. You want to address either of those before we take a hand up?
Sure. I'll just say that so no central nervous system. Interesting. I think that central nervous systemism. It's an ism, isn't it? Anyway, so for instance, from my elder's perspective, they say that, and there were councils held by spirit and or the Dine, the holy people, and they were kind of polling, who's willing to help these five-fingered ones. Man, they're a freaking handful. Who's gonna help them out here to kind of acclimate to what this place is all about and how to harmonize and everything. And there were certain plant nations that agreed to help. So sage said, yes, I'll help them. Cedar said, yes, I'll be willing to help them. Tobacco said, yes. Tobacco, tobacco is a spiritual currency. It's often used for offerings. And it offers itself up to us to be able to participate in this consent, in this consensual relationship that I'm talking about. And it also changes our thinking and our speech. So, people will say to me sometimes, man, I love how you pray. I love how you talk. And I've been saying lately, I said, it's because my elders taught me that when I'm going to get up and speak in front of the people, or when I'm praying, hold that tobacco. And so I don't feel like that's something that's generated from me. This tobacco is aligning me and giving me right speech. So central nervous system, I don't know that I can say that, I put it lower in some kind of hierarchy about what needs to be considered and what doesn't, because there's my little thumbs up waving around over there again.
I don't know where that's coming from.
Right, somebody's down with what I'm saying. And so, these are very revered elders for us. So am I going to make an offering and talk with them before I do anything? You bet I am. And omnibeneficent, it's saying it's blessing and benefiting all, the whole.
Beautiful. Oh, I'd love to invite Beth in to ask a question, if you can unmute yourself.
Hello. As soon as you started talking about all the agreements you make in life, I was thinking of money in the bank. And I thought, wow, look at all the agreements that I haven't really consented to, but I've consented to. And so I've been listening to you and I'm thinking, well, what the heck is right to do with whatever money I might have? Like I've been thinking, oh, should I invest in a 401k, or should I just spend it all now because otherwise we're screwed? I don't know. It's just, that's my question.
Financial advice from Women Stand Shining. Let's see. You heard it here first. No, it's a big question right now. And so one, I think you're pointing to something that I think is really important, which is that this money has a shelf life, friends. Right now, it is still serving as a way of directing focus, attention, and resource to different places. But I think that is, we're already had a little, I don't even know what was going on, but I just am seeing the ripple of whatever took place with the banks, last week. And it's breaking down, friends. It's breaking down. And I don't know that we're going to have that capacity to use money as a way of focusing our attention, our consent, our vote, if you will, for, whatever it is that we believe in. And so there is a question about, sitting on it, hoarding it. I say, I think that we still have to attend to our own well-being, but I'd be directing that somewhere this way, because it's that window is closing. And the other thing that, has come up, I was doing a session on sacred economics with Charles Eisenstein and David Abram, which was really great over here in New Mexico. And this guy had been listening for a couple of days, and he's like, I feel kind of screwy for saying this, but I'm just going to be honest. Like, I'm really concerned about my retirement, right? And yeah, understood. Power over paradigm is not too attentive to those who can't, scrap their way to the top in there. children, elders, people that they exclude from the paradigm, they're just kind of on their own, right? So it's a tough proposition. But so Charles looked at me, David looked at me, and they said, "You answer that one, Pat." And I was like, "Wow, okay." And what ended up coming out of my mouth was, you know what, community is going to be your retirement pretty quick here. So if you haven't started building community, if you've been in extreme isolation, which this paradigm allows and I would say encourages, it's time to find some community, because and participate in things intergenerationally. And speaking of intergenerationally, this is something that I struggle with, and I don't know how good a job I'm doing, but at least I can point to it, which is to say that mentoring and what's that word, legacy is how things have been done before. And so when elders are isolated from younger generations and vice versa, then we are left vulnerable and on our own. But if we can come together intergenerationally, that's a very powerful way as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring Emma in.
Hello, Pat, my beloved teacher. And I'm not crying for once. Usually when I listen to Pat, I can't speak, I cry so much. Pat, you talk a lot about sacred mountains. Now, you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to ask you, would you agree that a hill can equally be sacred? I live at the base of what to me is an incredibly sacred hill called the Malvern Hills in the middle of England. And would you agree with me to let people know where whatever you've got near you that is, it might not be a mountain, but it's sacred. Listen to it, talk to it, become its friend, do ceremony on it. Would you agree with that? So we don't have to just wait for those who, because in England we don't have mountains. They've got them in Wales and Scotland. We haven't got any.
No, dang it, it's the mountains. That's it. They're the most important thing. No, yes, for sure. Yeah, I'm just, again, I'm just noting that this particular mountain is making a very particular call. And so I'm bringing it to our attention. But absolutely, the next step after, if you feel to answer my call that this mountain is asking for sure, turn to your own mountains. And the hills are often the most ancient of mountains, right? Like they get the really sharp, pointy, high ones are the newer ones, and it's the rounded lower ones that have kind of literally peaked and are in their decline. So for sure, honor those hills. Thank you, Emma.
Great, thank you, Emma. There was a question in the chat that I would love to bring in and say something about, and then hear what you have to say about it, Pat. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so this was about transitioning from the power over paradigm to thriving life paradigm. How can we do that when, for example, we buy food? Because we can't gain our food's consent at that point when we're buying it from the supermarket in that way. And she said, I can't remember who posted this, but she says she struggles with this all the time. And that's just one example. But it raises that larger question of how do we navigate this when systems around us are so firmly in place like that? And I just wanted to share that I grow food and I buy food. And so I'm in this like kind of in between space of like really being in deep relationship with the food that I grow and tend on my in my space around here, and in that dynamic interbeing consent relationship. And I go to the supermarket and I buy some food, and I had this moment a couple weeks ago where I had to go get a lemon out of the produce section, and all of a sudden I saw the faces of all of the beings in the produce section, and I just like was gutted. And it was this interesting place where there's a forgetting or a blindness, I feel like, that we put on, or that we have on, that I have on often, that gets pierced occasionally, or sometimes I can consciously see through it, right? And sometimes I'm just like, I've got to put gas in my car, and I'm putting gas in the car, and I, put the card through the thing and it goes in. And other times I'm like sick with the feeling of what all that is, what that debt is. So I don't know if you maybe just want to speak to that a little bit. This very uncomfortable and challenging balance that we're in right now.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the numbing out is, I believe we're made to be so deeply relational. We're made for sacredness. We're made for ceremonies, what my elders say. It's like in our biology, it's in our psyches, in our spirit. It's, and so when this is requiring you to not, literally asking you, don't be thinking about what's going to happen over there, over there, over there. Your job is to excel and succeed and make sure you have what you need. Yeah, that's a deep numbing down process. And I do feel like it's certainly behind a lot of the addiction going on, and also the rising suicide rates. And because we're not actually made for that paradigm. Our psyches, our souls, our hearts, we're having to deny just like not only huge parts of ourselves, but some of the deepest, and I'm going to say best parts of ourselves in order to succeed here, So there's that. But one thing I want to say about, buying food in the grocery store. My mom was in the hospital recently and they sent this. So yeah, here's an apple, sort of. Look at everything that's involved with eating this apple. And so, I guess what I would say is, and Martin Prechtel talked about this with the corn. He said, the corn taught us not just about food and soil, but about mathematics and astronomy and physics and all kinds of things. When I listened to my elder talk about the corn plant, what first leaf indicates, second leaf, just the whole thing. It was just, he could go on for 4 days talking about it. And so that was one of our principal allies, elders, mentors on this whole continent, for instance. And so Martin Prechtel points out that, now it's being enslaved in the whole GMO process. They can tell you how many plants will grow in a square yard or whatever, and how many ears on each plant, and maybe even how many kernels on each cob, because it's all being genetically engineered, right? And so he talks about the enslavement of the corn and how the corn sustained us in such strength and vitality. And now those kinds of corns are hardly available. And instead, it's all going into like high fructose corn syrup, which is actually breaking us down mentally, not just physically and emotionally. And I've heard one elder in Veracruz, Don Juan Cibron, talk about how we are being diminished. Our spiritual capacity is being diminished. We cannot even reach the places that we once did. So I'm watching that clock too, but I'm going to say that I had this moment when, because we work with tobacco a lot. And so people give you like commercial bugler packet of tobacco for ceremony. And I just had this moment. And then other people will give me like homegrown sheaths of tobacco. And I think, wow, that's so beautiful. But I really wanted to acknowledge that Marlboro cigarette, that somebody gave me, because I wanted to say they can't hide the sacredness of you from me in this.
Right.
I see you. I know you're there, and I acknowledge you. And so I'm going to treat you, or someone wrote in the chat, sacralize you just as much as I would that homegrown tobacco. And so I think that, our intention of seeing our relatives enslaved by GMO, enslaved by chemicals at the grocery store, I think that's actually an amazing opportunity for us to say, I see you, and we're both working against this enslavement together. So that's something that I think of. Yeah.
Great. Oh, beautiful. We are at the top of the hour and there are hands stacked up, and it breaks my heart to not hear the questions that are in the hearts of the people there. And also, I feel like it's really important to honor the amount of time that we set aside for this. So, and your time. So, feel free to type whatever you want to type in the chat, to say goodbye, to put your question out into the consciousness of the group. Please stay tuned for our follow-up email, because it's going to include a lot of the resources that we referenced in this conversation. And if there's any particular things that you want to be included in that follow-up email, you can jot that in the chat right now, because I'll look at this.
Yeah, and I was seeing someone talk about where do I do this, where do I do that. So some of this information will be soon going up on patmccabe.net. So that's my general website.
Great. And whenever it's ready, I'll make sure that it goes out to the people who registered for this event. So thank you all. Thank you, Pat. Oh my gosh, it's such a joy and a pleasure to get to spend time with you to talk about these important things. I feel like we got into so much and just scratched the surface of all that there is in this to talk about. And I really, really appreciate spending this time with you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here today, for being part of the Work That Reconnects Network webinars and cafe program. And if you're not already familiar with the Work That Reconnects, please visit the workthatreconnects.org to learn more about the network. And if you're not already a member of the network, you can become a member. I think, Eileen, if you don't mind popping that in the chat again, because it might have gotten buried, but there's a link that she's going to pop in the chat there. If you want to become a member and become more involved with what we're doing at the Work That Reconnects Network. We also have a feedback survey that we always share after an event, so that you can tell us what was great and what was challenging and anything that we need to know to learn how to do this better. So please go ahead and do that. And if you want a copy of the transcript for today's experience, you can click on View Full Transcript and then Save Transcript at the bottom of the transcript screen. That will allow a copy to get downloaded onto your device. And similarly, if you want a copy of the chat, you can click on those three little dots at the bottom of the chat window and click on Save Chat. So I know there was a lot of great things, questions and resources and ideas shared in the chat.
Jill, how do you click on the save transcript? Where is it? I don't see it.
If you go to the three little dots that say More at the bottom of your screen in the menu, you'll see, I think if you click on Captions and then View Full Transcript, it will pull up a transcript window on the side, and then there's a button at the bottom of that that says Save Transcript.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. All right. It's been a real pleasure. It's so beautiful to see and hear from all of you. And again, thank you, Pat.
Yeah, my honor and my pleasure. Thank you, Joe, for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.